Okay, so to kick off, as I said, we're going to start off with revisiting Adaptations Without Delay, and so I'll hand over to Rachel, who's one of the authors of the initial report, to give you a reminder of what that involved and how we're going to follow that up over the next few months.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so at the end of this, we'll just be talking about the DFG Assessment Summit that we're doing in June of this year, but I thought it'd be useful just to kind of talk a little bit around adaptations without delay and kind of how from that journey it's led to the DFG Summit. So Adaptations Without Delay was published in 2019 after quite an extensive review of minor adaptations without delay. So I think the project started about 18 months, I think, from memory, before the Adaptations Without Delay publication was published in 2019. So hopefully you'll be familiar with Adaptations Without Delay. Obviously it's a Royal College of OT publication, but the work was done by Housing Lane, and I was part of that team with Housing Lane and my colleague Marnie Walker, who for those hopefully that know Marnie, who's a very experienced occupational therapist in housing adaptations. So this is what Adaptations Without Delay looks like, so hopefully you're all familiar with that, and it can be downloaded from the Royal College of OT website. In terms of the purpose of the document, so it built from Minor Adaptations Without Delay, where obviously that publication, which I think was published in 2006, was around how we enabled actually housing associations to deliver minor adaptations more quickly. The review of that document recognised that there was a gap in terms of major adaptations. So the whole purpose of this document is recognising that the demand for occupational therapy assessment, certainly in social care, was at the time and continues to be under significant demand. And it was around how we can ensure that we reduce the demands of on OTs so that they can work on those complex cases. So that was one of the kind of key purposes. The second purpose was obviously linked to that, was to ensure that people needing adaptations got that responsive service that they need. Because what the evidence shows us is that the longer people wait for an adaptations, the greater their needs get. So they end up needing more expensive adaptations, more extensive adaptations. So if we can provide a more responsive service by not having to have people wait for an assessment, then we reduce the demands on the DFG and enable people to get those adaptations when they need it. Obviously, another impact or another purpose was that the government has heavily invested in the DFG. So from 2015-16, we've seen the DFG budget rise from around 230 million to around £500 million, or just over £500 million where it stands today. So obviously the government is investing heavily in the DFG, and we needed to look at how we enable that uplift to be used efficiently. So again, because obviously for government, the DFG is that a way of supporting people's health and well-being, reducing health and well-being needs by getting adaptations in that people need to support their health and well-being. Also, a document, one of the purposes of the document is to provide an evidence-based rationale for when you do and you don't need an occupational therapist, to provide stakeholders with a clear rationale and understanding around where occupational therapists bring value to the adaptations process, as well as kind of going back to that first point around reducing the demand on OTs, around how we make best use of the experts. Sorry, did I say £500 million, Paul? Don't know if I said £500 million, but it's £500 million pounds that the government's invested in the DFG. Yeah, so just looking at how we make best use of that expertise of OTs, which are on those complex cases. So that was the whole purpose of the document: reducing demand, getting people adaptations in a more timely way, and making best use of those assessment skills that occupational therapists have. So in terms of what's in the document, so in here, if you've not looked at it, you will find a definition of what complexity looks like. So what is a complex adaptation versus a simple adaptation? It provides a very neat framework around providing a personalised, proportionate response. It then provides tools to help people wanting to do things differently to look at the workforce and operational things that they need to think about if an OT isn't necessarily going to be involved in all adaptations, as well as demonstrating how other staff can actually carry out those simple assessments. One of the things that myself and Marnie were really clear about is I don't think we put anything that was groundbreaking in the document, because what we were actually doing was using innovation that was already happening and continues to happen around England in terms of trusted assessor models doing things differently rather than an OT. So what we used was that evidence base around what was already working out in the UK. And right at the back of the document is some various links to kind of design guidance as well. So that is what you will find in the document. So that definition of what complex is and a framework to think about how you provide that proportionate response, as well as thinking about the tools that you need to actually make that happen. Just really, really quickly, this is in the document, and this just helps describe what we mean by a complex adaptations. And the good news is in terms of the DFG guidance, so this cross thing on the right hand side is taken from the new DFG guidance and more or less mirrors what is in the DFG, what is in Adaptation Without Delay. So we've got that synergy there between the DFG guidance that was published last year, which is kind of more or less adopted how we look at complexity in Adaptations Without Delay. And again, it's this idea around where the person's situation is straightforward, where they've not got complex comorbidities, where the environment is relatively simple, where you're looking at one or two activities being affected. You know, we can do things differently through that trusted assessor model or even self-assessment. So yeah, so what's in Adaptations Without Delay very much supports what's in the new guidance in terms of where we need to be using OTs in the DFG process. And again, this is just this framework that we talked about. So this is the Adaptations Without Delay framework. So again, it's about providing a proportionate response, and it is based on that personalised care model. So if you work in the NHS, you'll be used to that personalised care model. And it's that idea around OTs being involved in those complex cases, so where you're needing more specialist skills. Often these more complex ones need a more integrated, joined up approach, whereas perhaps people with more targeted needs or more universal need perhaps need self-assessment or trusted assessor support in terms of that assessment. So that is just, that visual there is just the actual framework from the document. So these just show you what a person with universal needs, or what a situation with somebody with universal needs look like, the kind of workforce skills that you need to work with an individual with simple needs, and then kind of the operational considerations. So there's a table for universal, and then there's a table for targeted, and then there's a table for specialists. So the OTs here, I'm going to now challenge you to think about your own caseload. And if 90% of your cases are not these kinds of individuals, then you really need to be thinking about whether you, in terms of providing that proportionate response, whether you've really got it right within your local authority, because really the majority of cases should be these types of situations. And again, recognising, which again we pick up in the new guidance, that often these cases, it's not just the OTs that need to be involved with these cases, but it's also about, as you can see here, around having that integrated approach to those cases. So yeah, just a bit of a challenge for the OTs out there just around, have a think about your own caseloads. Are you still dealing with the little Mrs. Russells who are naturally ageing in place, who are just struggling with a bit of bathing? Or is it that your caseload is 80% these types of situations? So that kind of brings us to 2023. I think I'm really fortunate because obviously being one of the lead authors with Marnie on Adaptations Without Delay, and obviously the work that I do within foundations, it's almost allowed me to kind of continue the work that has fallen out of Adaptations Without Delay. So this brings us to 2023. So I think what hasn't clearly changed and is actually probably more of an acute problem than ever is that assessment capacity in social care, and I don't need to tell the OTs in the audience, continues to be stretched. Certainly COVID has, with things like discharge to assess, urgent care response, then as OTs you need to be focusing on those more complex cases. So I think what hasn't changed and has actually increased is that capacity is continuing to be stretched. And I think the kind of pointer on here needs to probably be in the red. So I think it continues to be really important that we need to be thinking about those simple cases and are we doing what we need to do. Just put this on, just kind of, I did this slide for the roadshows in September and just kind of reflecting on where we are. I think we are, as OTs, really doing well in terms of using our assessment skills around complexity. Lots of local authorities now are engaged and have adopted a trusted assessor model. I think there's still a lot of work that we can be doing there. I think where we're not doing so well is that we are continuing to see significant waiting times for individuals with relatively simple needs who are still waiting for some kind of social care OT type of assessment. I appreciate there's issues around recruitment and workforce, that exacerbates this. But I think in terms of we've got an ageing population, we've got an ageing workforce, we need to start thinking differently. So for me, this is where I think there is a significant gap and we need to be doing more in terms of, right, how do we actually tackle this? Which is why the reason that we're doing the assessment summit, which is around a call for action, getting people together who really do want to move this agenda forward, who really want to challenge our professional identity, challenge the way that we're doing things, be innovative for those cases that are simple. So we're not talking about the complex ones, we're talking about the really simple cases. So the assessment summit is for those professionals out there who want to be challenged, who want to think differently, who want to look at how we best meet people who have got relatively simple needs. So that's what the summit will be in 2023 this year in June. So we've got a few keynote speakers, and then we're going to have interactive workshops that are going to be really thought-provoking, and we're going to have 6 workshops, and this is what we'll be covering in those workshops. So you'll have opportunity to attend 2 of these. So we're going to have a workshop that gets us thinking about self and remote assessment. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? We're going to be looking trusted assessor model. How do we make that work effectively for the DFG process? We're going to get really brave and think about actually what roles and responsibilities do perhaps manufacturers and suppliers have in terms of supporting what we're doing in social care, and perhaps, is there an opportunity to look at their involvement in reducing the demand on social care? We're going to be looking at mop-up assessments, services, and how do we make those work for local authorities? What are the strengths of those types of services for local authorities? How do you make that type of service sustainable and work for your local authority? We've then got a little bit around unpicking and perhaps decoupling the social care legislation from the DFG legislation. Often Care Act and Children's Act legislation unnecessarily gets coupled with Care Act legislation. So we're going to have a workshop that explores how do we unpick that, uncouple it, so that people actually don't necessarily get shunted down a social care pathway that they might not actually want to go down. And then again, linked to that is actually redefining what we mean by consultation. Hopefully you've all been on our DFG basics course, so we'll be aware that where you're a two-tier authority, you're looking at relevant works, the housing authority has to consult with social care. Doesn't say anything around consultation needing to be a social care assessment. So actually, we want a workshop that looks at the opportunities and risks of redefining consultation and moving it away for those non-complex cases from assessment to a different type of consultation that perhaps might speed up the adaptations process for those individuals with relatively simple need. So yeah, so if you want to be part of the revolution, if you want your challenging, your thinking to be challenged, you want to, you know, enable people to have timely access, think about joining us. I think what is really interesting and we were talking about this yesterday, is when Marnie and myself first, obviously when Adaptations Without Delay was first published, we received a lot of critical feedback from fellow occupational therapists, where we were really challenged about, that perhaps what we were doing was threatening our identity. I think what's really positive now is the recognition that this document has actually strengthened our identity, because what it's enabling us to do is work with those cases where our skills are needed, and not the more simpler cases where actually we're not adding anything to that person's journey who needs an adaptation. So hopefully we will see some of you there in June. So hopefully that's just been a useful insight in terms of the work that we did on Adaptations Without Delay, and how that work is still continuing with the stuff that we're doing at Foundations and building on that work.